This is the Persian Empire under King Xerxes. It reached from the Indus Valley to the Upper Nile, encompassing 127 distinct provinces. For the people living within these borders, the king's authority was absolute, leaving nowhere to hide from the reach of the central government. From the capital at Susa, Xerxes maintained his rule through displays of overwhelming wealth. He famously hosted a feast for his nobles and military leaders that lasted for 6 months, serving wine in gold vessels to showcase a level of prosperity and pride that few empires have ever matched. This environment of absolute ego allowed Haman, the empire's highest official, to weaponize the king's pride. Enraged by a single man's refusal to bow to him, Haman convinced Xerxes to issue a decree calling for the total annihilation of every Jewish citizen in the empire on a single specific day. Once the royal signet ring was pressed into the wax, the law became final. Under Persian law, a royal edict is irrevocable. Even the king who issued it cannot rescind the command. The fate of an entire population was legally sealed. The Book of Esther records this historical crisis, but it contains a literary mystery. Despite describing a series of improbable events that save a nation, God's name is never mentioned in the text. The contrast is stark. On one side is the visible, crushing power of the Persian state. On the other are the exiled Jewish people, living in the shadow of a law that mandates their destruction. This raises a central question. How can a marginalized people survive an empire-wide genocide when their greatest protector appears to be completely invisible? The reversal begins with a domestic dispute. When Queen Vashti is banished for defying the king's pride, it creates a vacancy in the palace. This opening allows Esther, a Jewish orphan hiding her true identity, to be positioned as the new queen. Around the same time, Esther's cousin Mordecai discovers an assassination plot while sitting at the palace gate. He relays the warning through Esther, and the king's life is spared. The event is recorded in the official chronicles of the empire. Yet Mordecai receives no reward, no public recognition, and no change in status. He simply returns to his seat at the gate. This oversight functions like a tightly compressed spring. It is a recorded obligation, preserved in the royal archives and waiting for the exact moment it can be triggered to provide the most impact. When Mordecai urges Esther to intervene, she faces a lethal legal reality. Approaching the king without being summoned carries an automatic death penalty, unless the king extends his golden scepter. To save her people, she must risk her life by stepping into the throne room uninvited. Esther survives the encounter, but she doesn't plead her case immediately. Instead, she invites the king and Haman to 2 consecutive banquets, stretching the timeline and waiting for the right moment to speak. During the narrow window between these 2 banquets, the first coincidence occurs. King Xerxes suffers from a sudden bout of insomnia. To pass the time, he orders the royal chronicles to be read aloud. The scribes turn to the specific page detailing Mordecai's unrewarded loyalty from years earlier. At the exact moment the king is asking how to honor Mordecai, Haman walks into the room. He has come to ask for Mordecai's execution, but he is interrupted by the king's question. Because Haman assumes the king wants to honor him, he describes a lavish public ceremony. Instead of an execution, Haman is forced to publicly parade his enemy through the city streets, a humiliation that effectively neutralizes his political standing just before the final banquet begins. At the second banquet, Esther reveals Haman's plot to the king. The reversal is swift. Xerxes orders Haman to be executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. But the primary threat remains. Haman's decree of genocide is still an irrevocable law of the empire, and the date for the slaughter is still approaching. To counter the first law, the king issues a new decree. It grants the Jewish people the right to assemble and defend themselves against any attackers, effectively turning a state-sanctioned slaughter into a sanctioned battle for survival. On the appointed day, the people stood their ground and achieved a decisive victory. What was intended as a day of mourning became the foundation for Purim, a celebration of how an unstoppable threat was dismantled by an unseen defense. The Book of Esther suggests that the absence of a name does not mean the absence of an actor. The story is structured to show that the primary force in the narrative was orchestrating every detail from behind the scenes. By focusing on bureaucratic records, sleepless nights, and narrow windows of time, the account shifts our attention away from grand miracles and toward the mundane. It argues that the most significant turns in a story often occur in the quiet alignment of everyday events, positioning individuals for a resolution they could not have engineered themselves.